and welcome to our first in a brand new series of lectures, our fall lectures. And for those of you new to this, this is actually one of our classes where we introduce students to fresh thinking and work in progress from writers, editors, curators, historians, even designers. And we open these lectures up to the public to give students a chance to ask questions in front of the public, which kind of raises the stakes of it. But also because it's always really been an aim of the programme to create a forum for discussion around design criticism, beyond just what we're doing here in terms of forging an academic discipline. We also always wanted to find ways to connect what we're doing within, to that larger New York design community. So that's what this is about. And I think we've got some interesting lectures ahead of us for the rest of the semester, so please do join us for any of them. And if you've missed lectures from our previous seasons or conferences, you can view them on our video page, which is accessed through our regular Decrypt website. And some are better quality than others, but you get the gist on most of them, so do check them out. And you can stay in touch with the programme and find out about any aspect of it, our faculty, our curriculum, the kinds of things we're up to on our website, decrypt.sva.edu, or by following us on Twitter, which we're really into at the moment. So do follow us at Decrypt. You can also register for our open house, which is coming out. We are in planning process of that right now, but if you're interested in the program, it's a great place to really kind of delve in a bit further, get to discuss with faculty and students about what it's really like to be here. So there'll be more details on that coming up soon. So, now it's my really great pleasure to introduce one very interesting half of one very interesting industrial design firm. Zoe Coombes and David Boira founded the furniture art design studio Cmmnwlth. Can I say it like that, or do I have to say Cmmnwlth? No, okay, because it might get a little awkward. In 2005, and their clients include Issey Miyake, Wolf Records, and Museum of Modern Art, and they produced this really fantastic line of furniture for the American furniture label MatterMade. Originally famous for their early adoption of a CNC milling machine, which is immortalised in the opening credits to Gary Misfit's film Objectified, as you've probably seen, they quickly gained recognition for their experimental work, which really kind of both disorientates and delights in its fusion of the values of craftsmanship with the potential of cutting-edge designing software and fabrication technology. Zoe Coombes is here to represent Cmmnwlth tonight, and I think she should feel pretty comfortable in the classroom as she's done a lot of studying. She holds a bachelor's degree with honours in philosophy and history from the University of King's College, Halifax. She began her architecture studies at Parsons and completed it at Columbia University. Then she got to spend some time as the caretaker of Villa Vandersburg, just outside of Paris, which sounds amazing. We need to visit you about that afterwards. And then after Columbia, not content with that set of degrees, she and her partner David then studied automotive design at the Art Center in Pasadena. So, a lot under her belt. I think we're really lucky to have such an interesting thinker and such an acclaimed designer all to ourselves tonight. So let's find out what's on her mind, and welcome to the podium, Zoe Coombes.
So thanks for coming this evening. So it's true, I am one half of a design studio here in New York. My husband David may be here a little later. I do want to a little bit talk not only about our work and what we've done for the last 5 years, which is a sort of typical designer format. Here's my 5-year portfolio, therefore I have a perspective on the world, but I really want to sort of talk to you about changes that I think are really happening in the world right now that I think are really altering things in significant ways, as well as like what is the sensibility on the street of New York. And I assume this is sort of really like what the design department is, on the hunt for all the time, right? You're to be writers. And of course, I'm going to have to talk a little about our work, because we can't really understand anything in total abstraction. So we'll talk about the things that we do, but I want to talk about it just as an example of what, you know, one group of people, one studio might sort of do in reaction to some of the changes we can maybe talk about. So I'm just going to start by talking about a product that we recently launched. This one person, Vika, is here in the back, who was working in their studio at the time, who was part of this project. Almost in the dumbest, most simple way, so you can sort of understand what we do, and then we can talk about some larger themes, knowing sort of how we work. So forgive me if I sort of dumb things down or amp things up, but I'll give you one example of one recently launched product. So this is a lamp, which we call the Celtanica, and it is cast in gypsum, which is a very old, simple material, you know, born of the earth, white, but it's modeled within Maya and within a program just basically working as a plug-in to Maya called Mudbox, which is able to give a kind of rustication to surface. So there's a long history of rustication in lighting because a change in form gives a kind of shadow play. So we modeled the interior digitally, but in a way that felt sort of, we wanted to do something that felt sort of expansive in the sensations, not the kind of sensation that you would expect of a robot, which is, you know, we understand sort of uniformity and repetition and efficiency. We were looking for something that felt a little bit indeterminate, even though it's coming from a tool that's based on binary logic. So the interior is modeled in Mudbox. As a sort of like inspiration, we were looking at, this is a painting from the Spanish Baroque by Francisco de Zurban. It was painted in 1635, and the kind of sensibility of the fur is not what we are often trying to elicit from sort of digital machines. Maybe the kind of another, kind of theatrical Catholicism, Teresa de Avila, this is a sculpture by Bernini, and there's centuries that was penetrated by the spirit, and this is all carved in marble. These are hard forms, much like the lamp is cast in gypsum, but there's a kind of sensual, soft expansiveness. So this is Bernini. This is Cmmnwlth, not to make a parallel, but you can see in here the build lines that come from the original SLA, the softness of the interior of the form, and how it's about a play of light and shadow, much like classical sculpture carved is. So we made this, we modeled this in the computer, printed it as an SLA, which is printed out in Oklahoma and sent by FedEx within 48 hours. But we took this upstate to a guy who's been casting for 30 years and used to work for a big art foundry, Polish, but now is working in much more lean ways, and he cast the pieces. And so there's this attempt to sort of relate kind of technology and imbue it with a sense of craftsmanship, or how do we connect these two things. So the Celtanica lamps, this is sort of one example of a recently launched project. But in order to, I guess I want to sort of talk about, we're working in an American design scene. There's a lot of excitement about the resurgence of American design, right? But I want to talk a little bit about sort of the broader, we're a little microcosm of what's sort of manufactured in America. We'll get to questions at the end maybe, but, or did you have a?
I have a burning question, which is how do you turn this on?
With a switch. It really is just a lamp in a very kind of basic way.
Okay.
But the broader sort of question of manufacturing in America, this excitement about the resurgence of American design, you can't think about American design without thinking of the idea of offshoring. and the idea that America used to produce a lot of things, used to manufacture a lot of things, and that left the country. And that's sort of, the story of Michigan, etc. It's also a story of automation. So we work a lot with CNC mills, and that lamp I showed you was made through SLA printing, which is through layers, but robotically building up a plastic. I maybe want to I'm going to have to sort of touch on these broad themes lightly because they're big things to unpack, but I'm very conscious of, here on the left are the robots for Tesla. And, we think about sort of the roboticization of manufacturing as sort of just replacing the welder. The guy who used to make one simple movement. But these sort of 5-axis CNC mills are like very adept and agile. And on the other side is the new machines for making shavers at Philips. And they're taking their manufacturing from China and placing it back in the Netherlands, but with 1/10 of the workforce that they would have in China. And apparently to make a shaver is much more complicated than to make an iPhone. So if Philips is doing this, there's an idea that this sort of offshoring to cheaper wage countries is maybe a precursor to full automation. And when you have full automation, in some ways it's a really good thing. You might bring manufacturing back to America, but you tend to have about 10% of the workforce that you had before. And I think this is a really big question. I don't have a way of sort of solving this, but I think it's a good thing to be thinking about. So it's not only, the Chinese assembler at Foxconn who is maybe going to be replaced by full automation if you take Philips as a model, but interestingly, like large parts of law, there's an interest, I took this picture from the New York Times, there's an interesting article a few months ago about what a big chunk of discovery in law is being replaced by computers. So computers going through millions of pages of paperwork and coming up with better analysis than human lawyers. Another sort of thing I'm watching is this access to big data. Amazon Web Services, AWS, they are offering big data space. So relatively small companies, relatively small, you don't have to be Walmart anymore, can have access to really big servers and can be writing algorithms to be doing very sophisticated kinds of questions at a much cheaper price. And I think that is going to produce a whole new kind of business coming from that. These are the models from H&M's catalog this year, which is the first year that they chose to do it without any human bodies in it. They're all modeled like we model in Maya. They still have real faces, but it's a lot cheaper than those models who were maybe making $14 an hour. But the idea that sort of like only the factory worker in Detroit is going to be replaced by some kind of digitization technology, I think is naive. There's, you always have to sort of think about Moore's law, which is the idea that the capacity of computers will always double every 2 years, and they double upon themselves geometrically, right? So it's 2 to the power of 2. These things get very strong very quickly. And this all sounds like horribly pessimistic, and so why are we into technology when it's about to eliminate everybody's jobs? The story of computers and chess I found kind of fascinating and hopeful. Let's take Kasparov. He was the best, he's still the world's greatest chess player, right? And so he was beat in 1997 by IBM's $10 million computer, Deep Blue. And Watson beat the best Jeopardy player, I don't know, a couple of years ago or something. So it's like, listen, and Jeopardy takes a lot of sort of, it's not just moves like chess. It's quite cunning. And, when that guy, I forget what his name was, in my notes here. Ken Jennings, when he was like final beat on Jeopardy, he said, well, I for one welcome our computer overlords. And it was this quote from an H.G. Wells story. And however, what happened in chess is, the computer always beats the man in chess. And Kasparov, after he was beat, he set up freestyle chess, where it's teams of pretty good chess players and pretty good computers, but not the best computer. Always beat the best computer and always beat the best chess player. So the team of human and computer working together is still more powerful than the best of either system. And I find that hopeful. So to sort of admittedly have come from Columbia's architecture department, which is very enthusiastic about new technology. We were working with a CNC mill, we still do SLA printing. For whatever reason, I've always had a sort of desire to be part of what is contemporary. In New York City as sort of, home of global capital, I also see culturally a very strong reaction against this. And almost in a moment of bad sociology, I'll sort of go through quickly. Here's just a few trends that I think a lot of people are talking about, the resurgence of craft, the artisanal, etc. And why is this happening now, I ask myself. I know 3 people, here's some stills from a movie from a magazine called Kinfolk, which I think is really good at sort of aesthetically pinpointing this world. These video instructions about how to make bread. Like, who needs to make bread in New York City? It's like complicated. I know 2 people who raise bees in New York City. It's like completely bizarre. And kind of wonderful. I'm very sympathetic to it. I think there's a real anxiety that in a highly digitized culture, we're going to lose old, basic knowledge. Here's some film stills from a friend of mine, Lindsay Edelman. She's a lighting designer who's very successful in the press and commercially. And she has this sort of fantasy film about how her pieces are assembled. And there's almost this kind of sewing bee or barn raising idea of how these lamps are assembled. Lindsay Edelman, you can watch it on her website. But it's almost as if these sort of like old religious cultures that founded the country are putting together these enormously expensive lights. And, it's a fantasy, but I think it comes from this concern that in this highly digitized world of efficiency, we're losing a sense of community. And I got an email yesterday that Fiden's new book is about this guy who runs a restaurant 600 miles north of Stockholm. His name's Magnus Nilsson, and his restaurant is called Farvakin or something. But he's into sort of, and the restaurant only serves 12 people a night. He serves lichen. He's into preserving food in ways that we don't do anymore because we have refrigeration. And there's this kind of viscerality to it. This was a still from this film of him sawing this animal thigh and scooping out the marrow to the diners. It's kind of like viscerality that I think we fear we're losing in a kind of digital world. And I sympathize with these trends. I find them concerningly Luddite in some ways, but I understand them. So to talk about our work, again, I'll tell you a little bit about an experience that we had that was maybe a little bit almost awkward, working for International Flavors and Fragrances, which is a big chemical company, a perfume company. We were working with the MoMA to talk about the relationship between scent and design. And we found ourselves working for a company that that we were very lucky to be talking to these scientists, because apparently no designers ever get to talk to these scientists and try to make some kind of collaborative project. But this is Dr. Bones, one of the chemists. I started to read more and more about the fragrance industry and understand the relationship between cancers, hormone alteration, and perfumes. And there we are, designers, making an interesting project with the MoMA. And I thought, this really is marketing for a company that is clearly the embodiment of very advanced science, but it's not really something that I want to see in the world. At least, I particularly want to see the advent of cancer, hormone disruption. So I'm going to show you a little film of sort of our not wanting to just go there and make another perfume, makes everybody look cool, sort of how we dealt with that.
What we're always seeking is the tactile, voluptuous, something that feels like an embodiment. We can make an embodiment of scent. I prefer to do that than create a scent. Oh, how about this? It smells really intense too. The building that had come in that they bought all the old wood from was used to make Civil War uniforms. I mean, they are pieces of antiques.
This material has like a very, very long history, let's say 200 years. It's burnt. Something dramatic happened, we don't know what it is, so we're kind of like playing CSI at one level or another.
So we took a sample of the wood, they subjected it to their headspace technology. They'll build a controlled space over the material and trap the molecules that are emanating off of that material in an absorbent pin. From that, they use a GCNS machine, which will spit out exactly what this is at a molecular level.
The smell of this food, it was half burnt. You know what, it was not really very pleasant. When we did the mood mapping, it was just to have really the adjective good or bad.
Harsh, chemical, therapeutic.
Heavy, stressed, masculine. From that, we started to sort of envision this world of a butcher, this man dealing with meat.
It'll be like very like visceral and like disgusting.
In this three-part form, there's this kind of like tripod feeling to it. So we're going to be breaking this piece into three. We're going to make each out of a block of wood, and we're going to flip it so we can get a complete 3D piece.
All this crazy smells start coming out when you run the file because all these chips are flying everywhere and it's really fast. So you're getting this really visceral aroma going back there that it's not, I'm not saying it's pleasant. In fact, at some moments it smells like a little bit like urine, and another ones just smells like, you know, like molded things. I don't know, but it's happening through running the machine, like being a little bit romantic here, if you will. But I mean, that's what is happening. I mean, it's creating a reaction out of like this raw material as we're trying to transform it back into like this object.
It's the truth of the
That's perfect.
what the wood wants to become.
Great.
It's maybe a lot to pick up from one tightly edited film by Jane Nicholson. But the idea was really to go to a company that I think we had a lot of respect for the kind of complexity that it achieved, and yet to had a lot of kind of questions about whether this was a good thing or not, and to try to pull some kind of beauty from it without rejecting the kind of intelligence. So whether it was understood or not, we took some lumber from the back of Bushwick, wet lumber, but that really was antique, and had them analyze it in their GCNS machines, which they have an enormously sophisticated algorithm called mood mapping technology. And it is an algorithm not unlike algorithms that have radically changed Wall Street, where they're entering the olfactory molecules that emanate off this old wood and are associating, figuring out what the emotional associations are. So with that smell. So, the ones that we got back were these, harsh chemical, old, aged, stale, medicinal. And from that, we said, okay, we've had this very complicated analysis of what this smell is. Let's make a program, an object, a piece that reflects those adjectives. And it's sort of a way to try to twist this science, not into another perfume, but as a way of making a thing. So, and there's, I think there's a kind of Luddite sophistication with the kind of resurgence of butchering too. So the idea that we had made a butcher is, I think, this was a few years ago, but you can see that we're sort of part of this kind of cultural trend of not knowing which way to kind of go. And these are from the models of how we developed the model for it, and the butcher block in the end, which my friend Tom, who's gone off and started a butcher shop, hipster butcher shop, offering better meat than kind of your standard industrial fare, lent me his knife and a pig's head for photo shoot. So, and I don't want to sort of present everything that we do as so kind of enormously complicated, because that really was something from the world of art. But a lamp that we did, you know, we spent a lot of time sort of cutting stuff on our own in our studio. You know, at a certain point, you know, so we did a lamp called the Truncheon, a series of 3 lamps. And we ended up, there's 3 pieces. There's a task lamp, a suspension lamp, and a wall lamp. But it was better for us to do this with a woodworker in Pennsylvania. And he's a 3rd generation woodworker, and he, you know, 10 years ago took a big financial risk and converted everything to digital fabrication, basically. And there's a lot of hand finishing, and he has a much smaller workforce than he would have had if he stayed with sort of the 1950s set of tools. But he sort of survived in ways that many people around him hasn't. So I think us making it, you know, we made all the prototypes, but working with Rudy upstate, there's a kind of knowledge that he holds that we're able to tap into. That I think would, you know, and a knowledge that we're in a kind of communication that we're able to do because this stuff is done locally. That's quite beautiful. And so this kind of overall trend of a concern of, you know, a loss of craftsmanship knowledge, I understand, and I'm really sort of seeking to kind of work with technology in a way that we can work with people who have real craft knowledge. So this is the task lamp. The base is made by Greg, the guy who cast the Sultanica lamp, and the wood part by Rudy, CNC Mills, SLA. And they are sold through MatterMade, American label. And it's been a really kind of fruitful partnership. You know, I think of people sort of using the, you know, the best people doing the job and the right tools. Oh, sorry, slide alignment. It's so, and it's not, I'll show you a couple of other examples of us sort of working with this network of craftspeople that are still around in New York. It's certainly possible, it's not easy. But this was a set of door handles that we were commissioned to do, and we cast them in Brooklyn. They were cast from an SLA print. They're cast into wax, and a mold is made, and there's a page in the background, and we're counting and dummied, cleaning off the wax. These are the molds from which they come. There's actually an incredible amount of handwork that needs to go into the polishing afterwards. They're called the morphinas. So there's the rapid prototyping print next to the bronze as it comes out of the cast. Polishing process and what it turns into. So, and a third, I'll go through this very quickly, relationship with sort of crafts. This is something that we did, one of our first projects actually, we wanted to work in porcelain, and we found Beam Porcelain, which, you know, had its heyday in the 1950s as a kind of fine American porcelain company, and they're based in Trenton, and, you know, the kind of demise of Trenton has not escaped the demise of Beam Porcelain in some ways. And we sort of brought them an SLA print and said, can we cast this in porcelain? And those are the drawings of them. And, you know, of course, they sort of said, wow, what is this? Oh my God. And it felt really sort of exciting, the idea that you could go to a company that was not, you know, it's not on the up. It's kind of had its cultural heyday, and sort of say, listen, we can bring a new technology to you. Can we kind of, you know, revive this way of making and kind of value the expertise that you have. And so porcelain with Beam. And this kind of issue of grit that I think that Scandinavian restaurant, you know, sawing through these bones and scooping out the marrow is also something that we've sort of tried to bring to a kind of technological process. So this was a flooring that we did, which we called flushless. And it was modeled in a program called RealFlow, which is made for modeling liquids and gases. So it's made for modeling natural processes. So this is a model basically of bubbly water that we were able to imprint on the floor. So here are two of the tiles. This is the plan and the tiles that we broke down and the model of water that we sort of threw on the floor. And we very simply milled these in 14 ply plywood and really kind of cheap material. And stained it white. We called it fleshless because we were really looking for the kind of translucency of like a very Caucasian skin, something very kind of animal-like in some ways. So it's not necessarily gritty, but there's a kind of bodily sensibility that we've been looking for within these technologies. And here's an album cover that we did with photographer Tim Sisenti for Work Records, the artist Flying Lotus. And we made some models that Tim photographed. So these are SLA print models. Tim Sisenti did the photography. And it was really to give this sense from a little digital model of kind of wetness. So these are sort of the spreads that are the, album artwork is an interesting world to me because it's the trigger that allows you to visualize something very abstract like music. And very quickly, another final project, lard. We made these, this is a table, we made these sheets, these drawers that would pull in and out that were sort of based on this is a painting by a woman named Victoria Reynolds, but this idea of making a kind of fleshy surface that could be gripped in ways that you can pull these slides in and out of the table in ways that there's sort of many handles. But there was a kind of fleshiness that we were looking for. And we made some bureaus, a relationship between a very kind of clean and controlled and very fleshy interior, but a kind of animal nature that one can that we did a stool, that one can evoke from digital tools. So maybe to sort of finally, as a kind of conclusion, to talk about this Saltanica family with a little bit more depth now that you can sort of see the issues that maybe we sort of think about and the kind of take that we've had on it. But in all these projects, there's been this sort of idea of how to kind of romanticize the machine and kind of counter this assumption of that a computerized world would be a very cold, efficient Jetsons kind of world. Now, we know that we can evoke a romantic sensibility. So, just as those are sort of some much earlier projects, this Saltanica family actually began with an exhibition where we were asked to take parts from the McMaster catalog, which is an enormous catalog of industrial parts, so the parts that sort of build factories, let's say, and to turn them into another kind of aesthetic. So we took these high precision bronze bearings and parts and melted them down into what on top was called the Smolten mirror, but was a mirror and that had very different kind of sensibility that seemed to be less precise and maybe had a kind of romantic value to it. It was a reflective mirror. And so the back of it, was really this kind of place of figuring out how to play with rustication, and the front of it, how to play with smoothness and how to work the two together. And there's, I think what we've really found is that in the digital world, there's a real anxiety about too much smoothness, too much cleanness. Whereas in the real world, there are always scratches. We're always sort of countering the scratches. So here we're trying to sort of take items made for efficiency and precision and how to bring a kind of grit to them. And from that, sort of gave us the language to do that light, which I began talking about. We did a set of wall hooks. So this idea of we know how to evoke a kind of rustication. Where do we apply it? Well, the interior of lighting. Hooks on the wall, a kind of relief, allows for something to be hung. These are the molds from which they came from, again, cast by Greg. And the third piece in that family, we did an umbrella stand. So rustication as a way of kind of producing a grit. So the bases, so the prototypes of the bases that were milled, again, by Rudy upstate. And the kind of parts that have to come together. And this kind of, I think, what's become clear to me in sort of 5 years of playing with this kind of technology is that a kind of desirous or erotic sensibility can certainly come from machines. And I think when you start talking about algorithms replacing lawyers and replacing customer service in ways that feel very desirable, algorithms that understand our desire in art, it makes me feel like we don't want to underestimate the kind of seduction and capabilities of computers, technology, I don't know, that's the broad world, and that we want to think very carefully about the fact that we have choices here. And this is sort of our response of sort of in what ways are we going to combine the strengths of people and the strengths of machines to make products in the kind of world we want. And I think a lot about this Jeopardy answer, that's still the best this computing chess answer example, is that still the best chess players is not the biggest computer and is not the best chess player, but it's about the precise or the right combination of humans and machines. And here's a picture of David's father, who is an artist, and David many years later, because I think a lot of those sort of cultural examples, which are maybe understood as a little bit, Luddite or kind of reactionary against technology, are sort of looking to the past, and that's kind of an enormously valuable, how do we sort of look through this technological world and make connections to the past and always understand that we have kind of choice in this combination of past and the future of people and machines. Is maybe the one thing that I can leave as some kind of recommendation. Yeah. I don't know what it was. David, my partner.
Yeah.
Questions for him, because I've done all the typing tonight.
Okay, all right. That was just so exciting, Zoe. Thank you. Wasn't it? I mean, just you brought us really into the presence of process, actually quite viscerally, even through video and image, through your descriptions of that. I was transported. So, guess what I want to talk about? Criticism. And just the way in which you're, I would love you just to reflect a little further on it. You were talking about lots of the things you're doing in terms of raising questions. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about, what criticism means to you, its role, its significance, and how you imagine publics kind of engaging with that criticism. Are your objects that you produce sort of in the form of questions to be inserted into people's living environments that then they can then engage with? Or do you think that criticism takes place more at a kind of the level of press and the exhibitions and the art world, at a level of kind of dialogue amongst perhaps more expert people rather than the users of your objects?
Well, it's a tricky question, but I think as you're talking about at the beginning, I did do a degree in philosophy, and I did sort of maybe approach the world through language initially. And David and I began working together in the architecture department at Columbia. And David, I don't know if it's a matter of a different nature or a different experience. His father was an artist, and mine is an urban designer, which is something sort of about more logistical organization. But David, I think, thinks through the world much more, is a visual person. And he came to understand the visual world as a very direct, undeniable conversation that we're having all the time. And that there's a kind of speaking of objects that happens on its own. And I think that's enormously important. And I think people like me who are sort of born to kind of want to change the world in some ways that I think is better always sort of think that words is the way to go. And I sort of have found that, what we've been doing is to sort of recognize that a very visual world is a very direct way of talking. And to not sort of write that off. I think I was really dismissive of that. And I think, neither of them can go kind of unbridled, but no matter how much we talk about things talk in their own ways, and sort of to support that is kind of important.
So then perhaps part of your critical language that you're developing then, it allows for sensations of uncomfortableness or, right, because it's subtle, right, what you're doing, these questions.
Do I need this? I think so. And I think also a lot of the things that we, so a lot of the things that are sort of being discussed today, what I was talking about, this, does it matter that America doesn't produce anything? Does it matter that we're all urban people who don't know how to make anything for ourselves? If the Armageddon comes, we don't know how to make food, we don't know how to do anything. Is that disruptive to our sort of confidence? I think in some ways these are really old conversations. I feel like I was a child of kind of hippie parents, and these are sort of like, oh, the world should be different, and we should be making things in more humane ways. And I think that really change happens in the world when there's an aesthetic shift, and when we have this moment of, I'm not sure what it is, I'm not sure that this is a new future, and you sort of rebuild things around yourself. And I have this sort of sensibility of, if you want to talk about criticism, because that usually has to do with, I envision a better world, let's change it to get there. I think that happens most powerfully when there is kind of an aesthetic kind of sea change that allows people to reform things in different ways. And that is why I have as much hope as I have concern with what I see as a real kind of sea change in the way that we are organizing, work in our economy right now. Not so much because of the web, but because of big data and the real cunningness of algorithms, much more cunning than we're kind of working with. I think there inevitably will be a kind of aesthetic sea change that hopefully we set up things in smarter ways than we have in the past.
Wow, good thought. Well, I just want to, you mentioned in the course of that, you were talking about bringing your background in philosophy to bear on this body of work. Could you just talk a little for us about what you brought from architecture to product design, both sort of in terms of ideas conceptually and physically in terms of processes?
Sure. Well, I don't know, philosophy is not a particularly useful degree in some ways, and architecture is much more the world of doing, which was enormous, a really useful thing in my life. But also, we started in Brooklyn, and I think there's a real kind of DIY movement, which I've sort of presented here as Luddite, but also an enormously positive. We were talking about the Maker Faire. I was talking about it with somebody here earlier. Is an enormously positive cultural shift. So I think this kind of shift from sort of thinking to doing, is the golden combination in life. And frankly, I think David and I also realize that we are this enormously, a microcosm of what is made and consumed in America, and would like to be a larger chunk of things. It's like it's almost a bad, like, what's the role of the product designer, to talk about stuff or do things? I mean, doing is always the better thing. It's a real challenge, and I think there are those opportunities.
But just to push a little further on that, I just wondered if there are, I mean, you can't compare your architecture training to a product design training because you didn't have the product design training, but are the processes and ways of thinking that you learn in your training as an architect that you see really kind of allowing you to do this?
Yes, sorry, that's not perfect, yeah. So in architecture, architects are, in the last 10, 15 years, have been gung-ho about embracing new technology, not just as a matter of efficiency, but of a way of really altering the design process. And it's been radical and ridiculous, and David and I kind of came to the end of paperless studios at Columbia, but there was a real kind of pushing of science and technology to do something kind of different. And my experience within product design world is that it's been much less ambitious with computers and how to sort of change that. And it's weird to me because architecture is so big and expensive and full of liability. You don't build a whole building as a little experiment of what something would look like, which is why in part David and I scaled down. Product design in many ways is a much better place to play around with that than architecture. It's really difficult. And I really respect the architect's kind of ambition there. And in product design, I see a real sensibility for business and a real sensibility kind of for manufacturing and how to scale up to the mass. And I feel like those two, gold is in the middle, and it's kind of frustrating to me that the two, or maybe I'm happy because I think it gives me a little more time to be that girl. But I really think that the gold is in the middle culturally between those two departments. They are.
That's the way it looks. Okay, so let's take some questions, first of all from the students, and then we'll open up to the public and I can help you pick them out. So, we'll put that from Linda.
Hi, could you explain in terms of how you sort of developed your philosophy? Was the genesis of it, did it evolve over time, or was it just a moment of insight where you wanted to bring craft and technology together? Had you been working in a different way, and did it suddenly change, or how did it come about?
No epiphany. No epiphany. I mean, there's certainly a moment of, like as I said, I don't know what it is within me, but I've always sort of had this desire to be contemporary, let's say. And with David and I just sort of playing with things materially, I guess we did come from a world where there was a lot of sort of online, in silicon experimentation, and it seemed right for the time to sort of test that at a level of material. And I don't think we're the only ones. There's almost a generation of kind of architects sort of doing that. But there's been a conversation between David and I of trying something and being like, oh my God, that works, or like, oh, that's horrible, just turn it off, I can't think about that. I mean, that's an evolving conversation that has later allowed me to articulate things. I think.
I think it was a little bit of a naive sort of approach.
Stupid.
A little bit like, we thought, oh, let's have this studio and make big scale prototypes for architecture, and then we're going to use them for like the typical lineage that you do, like the little cottage for somebody in the family and so on, and it gets present. And we quickly realized that didn't interest us. Like we wanted like a little bit more of an instant feedback. When you think of a graphic designer, they're working on a page or something, they can print it like a million times and look if their printing is right, or if they don't like the Pantone they're using. So we kind of wanted the same type of feeling. And because at the time we had come from going to art center and like mess around or like be very curious among the automotive department and see how they were working. because when you guys were talking about how does our education work into product design and all that, I think that what happens is that I think that we came in a moment where you think of architects as overqualified for doing things and then they don't know how to do anything. It was that kind of moment. Now it's getting more fine-tuned where you can see like the Net Stadium and things like that. That comes from a guy that graduated from the paperless studios, you know, shop architects. Yeah, so, but I think that with us, what happened more like linearly was like that we had this machine that allowed us to do all these models, and at the same time, the whole like design art world started to emerge. Some people hate that word, but let's say that the whole Miami Art Basel started happening, and we were getting invited. We just it was perfect for us at the time because Zoe, she hates I say this, but she's quite intellectual. She brings a lot of discussion to things. I'm a little bit more visceral. I'm more like, oh no, it's just like that. And Zoe, like, you know, go back and forth and things end up how they are. And I think that it was just like a bunch of little naive moments that just occurred. And it has like evolved to the point where now we don't need those big machines. We know there's an industry out there. We don't need to go to China. It happens to be upstate. So it's just been trial and error. I mean, but it started more like actually just collaborating with artists and then realizing that maybe the creative aspect sort of we were really attracted to, but at the same time needed those material objects. So that's how it's been going. And now it's more about becoming more, not like streamlined, but how can you take advantage of as your best expertise and let others that have the best expertise take over other parts. But it's different than product design because I think that product designers, as a contrast, they know very complex softwares that are for like creating tolerances for making these chairs connect and iPhones and things. iPhones now are like working in microns. It used to be that you would say, oh, I'm working on hundredths of an inch. Wow, that's fantastic. It's just, you know, like things are so rapidly happening. But at the same time, when you look at product design, everybody's trying to just use like very simple materials and connecting them in very banal sort of ways. They're wonderful. I love a lot of the stuff that's out there. But at the same time, it seems that what it lacks is that in product design, there has never existed like a theory department or something that sort of like tries to be like uber conceptual. Not so much as like say that what happened in Holland, you know, which seems like it has come to an end for whatever reason. But it seems that there's not that critical moment. It's all about just straightforward, like let's produce things. And I think that for us it's been more of a linear kind of process, right?
You can see it's evolving conversation.
Sorry.
It's just some more questions, no, that's great. And I wanted to, actually it's a restatement of Alice's question. I wanted to ask how you define success or beauty. Like who are you trying to help your
Success
satisfy?
or beauty?
Well, let's just say success. Limit. And who are you trying to satisfy? And is it important for you to be a critical or commercial success?
Certainly. Do you want to answer that?
No, I talk too much.
You know, look, to be frank, I mean, I think understanding the world of beauty is not to be, this is what I was trying to say earlier, is not to be dismissed as shallow. I think beauty is a very real, deep conversation that happens in people's guts that is related to a lot of kind of real things. I also think that we're working in a field that we've been lucky to be in a world that we can talk about the implications of what we're doing. That people want to write articles and say, what does this mean? This is about translating a new kind of sensibility. But in some ways, let's remember that there are some pretty serious problems on the horizon. I'm very interested in food. I mean, that's sort of why I was making kind of some references to it. And there's some deep problems there. And if we found a kind of way of, you know, making things desirous and kind of attraction, yeah, I think, you know, hopefully you'll look at our careers as not something that stopped in our 30s and that we'll be working for a much longer time. But if we can take this sort of
idea of how to integrate our comfortability with a new world into fields that maybe have deeper problems than furniture design. Not that there isn't a real problem kind of with how things are produced, but for example, the world of food. I mean, we together have, it's not an easy question of how do you sort of realign your business, but yeah, I still have a lot of ambition to be sort of working on harder projects at some point in my career.
I'm interested to hear about the challenges of actually starting Cmmnwlth. How are you overcoming those?
Challenging, and probably ill-advised. I mean, you know, it's always hard to say whether it's better to work for somebody for a long time and then do your own thing, or to go into it naively. And, you know, that he worked for Issey Miyake, was a fascinating architect. But, you know, we really sort of went into this without sort of shadowing somebody else's business. And we sort of did other kinds of businesses which are not really related to Cmmnwlth, but were income generating and learned from. And I don't know, it's hard to sort of say whether that's advisable or not. I do think with sort of like all this change that I've been talking about, I do think it's a particularly bad time to sort of be in school for any one profession. If you look at the kind of, you know, I think a lot about lawyers, right? Like these lawyers graduating with a lot of debt and sort of saying, okay, I'll do law, how law has already always been done. That seems to be a sort of particularly dangerous thing because I see a lot of fields changing rapidly. So that's not what we did. You know, there was a model of how to become an architect, and we didn't do that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to people doing that right now. And it's a particularly good time to start a business because you have a lot of access to big tools as small people. But, you know, there's a lot to be gained from shadowing another company too. And nobody can really say what would have been the smarter choice, but there's a lot of struggle with that.
Almost two minutes before we go on.
I just got a question about, because you brought up the term quite a few times, and I know that it's around a lot, the word craft.
Which term?
The word craft.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just curious whether or not you think, like what you think of the way that we seem to be using it now. It seems to be used in, so talking about methodology, but also talking about product and
what was the first one?
Methodology. Or
Methodology.
Yeah. Do you think that we're going to end up changing either our definition of craft or coming up with a new term to describe one of these parts of craft?
Well, I mean, I think the idea, you know, there's this like anxiousness about craft, right? Because it's talking to a friend, Leon Ransmeyer, he was like, listen, industrial design is somebody who knows how to go in, organize a factory, and make cool stuff. Craft, what do? Like a couple of like wonky things. Like, that's cool if somebody wants to do that with their life, but that is not industrial design, you know? There's this anxiety about the word craft, that it's less refined. And I think that's completely misplaced. I think there's a different kind of, we use that process as a way of putting risk, variation into end products that signal something that is uniquely human. And if we can enlarge the world of craft and stop looking down on it, I think that would be a good thing. And to make an analogy with the word of food, I mean, world of food, like farmers, you know, farmers are like country bumpkins. They're, you know, it's localism equals isolation. And you see that guy who's running the restaurant, and he's a very intelligent, aware, he's got a monograph, I find it now. You know, it's like localism without the kind of dumb ignorance that comes with isolation. So I think really the word craft should be elevated, the word farming should be elevated, whether it means a new costume or not, whether it gets co-opted by Whole Foods and Walmart, I don't know, and we have to change the word again. But I mean, I think there's something good about people with a lot of, I don't know, capacity for precision getting into these things that have just turn it and devalue it.
I just real quick, like, it was really good when you're asking, because I think that within your program, I think it's something to think about that we always question is the issue that I think that also where it creates these problems of definition. I think it's also media. Media, I mean press, I mean that when people ask about all this exposure, like I just think that the exposure is fantastic, but at the same time, sometimes you find like publications just need to keep having like new pretty pictures for their tea magazine or whatever it is that's coming out. You just need to fill out that stuff with new stuff. But sometimes, not specifically with tea, it could be any publication. Sometimes it seems that they need to come up with a topic, and let's say they call it a this kind of craft, and they bunch a bunch of things together, and they become like a trend. Like you open it, oh, so that's craft, and that flows, and it goes to blogs and all that stuff. And I think that we always think about that, like, man, we read sometimes they pick on a topic. It could be like a architectural term or something, and then you see the pieces they pick, and you kind of like cringe. You're like, wow. Like, is it okay for us to just say things because we're just consuming images, or do we need to be more critical?
We're going to sort that out, by the way.
Okay. I thought I just put it out there for you guys, exactly. So,
We're working on that.
fantastic.
Other questions from the audience? Okay.
I'm wondering, what do you think about the way that architecture schools in the pre-digital age didn't really want to teach too much about how things were actually made? It was considered a kind of a low subject. But as soon as computers come along, suddenly it's interesting, suddenly they want to teach it. It reminds me a little bit of how before computers, men didn't want to learn to type, use a typewriter, or if they knew, they didn't want to tell any other men. As soon as it's a very complicated computer, then they're interested, and now it's equal, somehow like making it more complicated made it more acceptable, but why was it less acceptable before when it was a simpler typewriter or a woodworking shop or a metalworking shop with the tools that have been around for centuries? I mean, isn't that older stuff interesting too? How did that become uninteresting just because CNC routers came along?
Yeah, well, this is what I was saying about the word craft, right? You could say it for carpenter. I mean, it's an elevation. I mean, it's kind of a wonderful thing too. I mean, I also think though that there's a problem in the world of architecture schools or whatever. And I have to, you have to remember that in order to have any kind of wider effect, you have to still be the organizer of producers, right? Rather than trying to sort of make everything yourself. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't raised in my family to like become a carpenter, and I kind of did a stint in it. We did a lot of cutting with a 9,000 pound 3-phase power CNC milling machine, which wasn't really what I expected to be doing after kind of Columbia, but isn't that wonderful? Isn't that liberating? Kind of, isn't it wonderful that people want to farm?
To say that the craft is to finish it and smooth it off. I mean, in woodworking shop, the guy with the sandpaper is the lowest one. There's almost no skills. That's not really using the tradition of craft. You just polish it up and get the bumps on it.
No, but for example, the way that we sort of laid out that light. So I did the example of that light that's produced in Pennsylvania with a 3rd generation woodworker. I mean, that guy knows Rhino better than I do. And he had a lot of comments about how he had made the pockets and the connections and how the wood behaves, and he's sourcing the wood with the kind of knowledge. Maybe I put the romantic picture of the guy sanding with his hand, but it's really the guy who owns that place, who knows how to work the programs and is kind of programming these machines. That's really bringing a kind of craft knowledge of the behavior of wood, etc., to that project. And for us to go to somebody who has 3 generations of knowledge was a benefit to the project. I mean, that's really where the craft is, not the guy doing a little sanding with kind of whittled hands.
Which is traditional. They help you a little bit.
We'll just take a couple more questions. John?
Hi. I'm wondering just general thoughts about the potential of 3D printing to seem to kind of bridge this gap between an impulse to pursue craft, but also
Well, I mean, it allowed us to get into that first the last project that I showed you, or the first project that we did, let's say going to Beam Porcelain and saying, can you produce this in porcelain? It allowed us to get in there and control the geometry, control the end work in a way that if they had, so, we brought them this SLA printed piece. Their normal way of doing it is sculpting of clay. So they do all these, they're much like Yadro in Valencia, they're kind of the American counterparts. So they do all these kind of wildlife that they would like sculpt in clay and then cast. So if we wanted to do that without rapid prototyping, we would have to say like, oh, can you make it a little more, can you make it a little more this, or like add a touch of that. Whereas working with Maya, we have our own internal kind of rules of composition and full ability to play around with it, not over somebody's shoulder. I mean, it allows you to get in there and participate in the project, which is enormously good thing, I suppose. Does that answer?
I mean, yes, I was not as specific as I should have been. I was thinking more in terms of home 3D printing and the ability. It's something that's kind of like burgeoning right now with maker bots and things like that.
Oh.
And you talked about the idea of like an aesthetic sea change and stuff like that. I'm wondering what potential impact it could have on aesthetics when you don't necessarily have centralized voices dictating how things look anymore.
That you have control.
Yeah.
To print in whatever materials and have some control of the finishing. Yeah. It's like a remote production thing. I mean, we've always, it's funny because all that MakerBot kind of stuff, it comes out as very like geeky. And one thing that we notice is accepting of the plastics. So we've really, for our sort of sympathy with this Luddite community, have really sort of rejected all the plastics. The plastics is the sort of assumed material that you're going to produce in when you're working with digital things, right? And so all that sort of MakerBot stuff feels very plasticky, very, and sort of not, but we are basically doing MakerBot on a bigger scale and maybe are very more sensitive to sort of like those choices. And so that's certainly something that could be scaled up by the home user if they became as intense as us, I guess. I don't know, does that answer the question? I mean,
sure, yeah.
I mean, that's going to be the question. If you put that technology on somebody's desktop, I guess hopefully somebody's going to say, wow, maybe this plastic part doesn't look so good because it could do something a little bit more erotic in its finishing. I mean, that's what this technology led us to do, so scale that up, that's natural.
I just have a very prosaic question. Do you have to self-fund the projects that you work on, or do you seek backing from clients? Like, how does the practical side of it come together?
So, I mean, that's never a first choice, logically, right? Sometimes they're commissioned, sometimes, and we've done a lot of work that's not maybe sort of part of the Cmmnwlth's portfolio that sort of fed that. And also, the companies that we work for are sort of, they're selling it's a high-end world stuff. And I'm very happy to be able to be part of that and make it happen. To come here and sort of talk about it. It's not necessarily a model that you can scale down to a larger economy where people have tighter budgets. And that's a problem. But I'm like, if I see a way that we can do it, that's where we'll do it.
And when you started, were you able to get commission, or because your ideas are so innovative?
Well, as I said, we started sort of with some other businesses, and we were working in art and some other and that sort of was part of that was an easier world, the world of sort of doing experimental things. It's not a.
So in 2006, we had at the same time a gallery space, so we did a lot of collaborations at the beginning, and we would talk 2006, we're talking happy times in New
Right.
York City. So you would talk to any company from Florian to Adobe to whomever, and they would throw anything at you. So it's a different time.
What, please, will you stick around doing other small questions?
I'm not going in.
Yeah, so we've ran some 3D printouts of some wine bottles in the next round. So, they'll join us very great. But before we do that, please join me in thanking once again Zoe Coombes.